The forest was silent. No birds sang, no insects chirped, no wind whispered through the ancient trees. This unnatural stillness should have been Seraphina Silverwind's first warning that danger lurked nearby. In her 7 years as a wandering healer, she had learned that true silence in the wilderness meant predators, and predators meant death. Seraphina paused on the narrow game trail, her pack heavy on her shoulders after 3 weeks of traveling between packs, offering her healing services for whatever scraps of food and shelter they would spare. Her silver-white hair hung limp around her gaunt face, her pale skin almost translucent in the dappled forest light. The gray eyes that had earned her so many fearful glances over the years scanned the surrounding trees with practiced caution. She should have stopped hours ago when the sun began its descent. The nearest wolf settlement was still a full day's journey away, and traveling these woods after dark was foolhardy. But sleeping alone in the forest had never bothered her before. She had been doing it since she was 15, since the night of screams and blood that had left her an orphan with no pack willing to claim a girl who looked like death incarnate. From her pack, Seraphina withdrew a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age and stained with herbal concoctions from decades of use. It had belonged to her grandfather, a battle medic from the Great Pack Wars over 60 years ago. His precise handwriting detailed not just healing remedies, but battle strategies, and the warrior's code that had guided his life. She had read it so many times that the binding was falling apart, the leather cracked and faded. "Never lower your guard in silence," her grandfather had written. "The absence of sound is nature's final warning." Seraphina closed the journal and tucked it away, her hand brushing against the silver knife strapped to her thigh. The blade bore the ancient symbol of the blue moon, barely visible beneath years of careful polishing. It was the only weapon she owned, passed down from her father before the rogue attack that had claimed both her parents when they tried to defend their small pack from marauders. That was 7 years ago, 7 long years of wandering, of offering her healing gift to anyone who would pay, of never staying long enough to form attachments because attachments meant pain when they inevitably pushed her away. She was exceptionally skilled as a healer. Both her parents had possessed the gift, and they had trained her well before they died. But no amount of skill could make people comfortable around someone who looked like death itself. Her appearance had always been problematic. Her hair was white as fresh mountain snow, her skin so pale that blue veins were visible beneath its surface, and her eyes the color of winter storm clouds. She wasn't quite albino, the healers had told her parents, but close enough that other wolves found her unsettling, unnatural, a bad omen. When her parents died protecting their small pack from rogues, no one had fought very hard to keep their strange-looking daughter. She had been given a bag of supplies and pointed toward the border before her parents were even buried. The memory still burned like an open wound. The cry that shattered the silence was high-pitched and terrified, a pained yelp that could only come from a young wolf. Seraphina froze, every instinct urging her to keep walking. Wolf cubs meant protective parents nearby. Protective parents meant territorial adult wolves who wouldn't appreciate a stranger approaching their young, especially not one who looked like her. But the cry came again, weaker this time, followed by a whimper that pierced straight through Seraphina's practiced detachment. Before she could talk herself out of it, her healing sense, the magical awareness that allowed her to feel injuries and illness in living things, suddenly flared to life. She sensed pain, agonizing pain. The cub was badly hurt. Seraphina moved quietly through the dense undergrowth, following both sound and instinct. Her footfalls were silent from years of practice, her breathing controlled despite the rapid beating of her heart. She knew better than to rush blindly toward an injured animal, especially in wolf territory. Instead, she used her senses to gauge the situation, stopping behind a thick oak to observe before revealing herself. What she saw froze her blood. The wolf cub was small, likely no more than a few months old, with pure white fur now matted with bright crimson blood. It was dragging itself across a small clearing, one hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle, deep gashes across its back still bleeding freely. But it wasn't the injuries themselves that made Seraphina's hands clench into fists. It was the 3 adult wolves circling the cub, their scarred muzzles and ragged fur marking them as rogues. Wolves without a pack, without honor, without the restraint that came from community and responsibility. They weren't hunting for food. This was something far worse. They were playing with the cub, letting it crawl a few feet before nudging it with their snouts or nipping at its wounded leg, clearly enjoying its terror and pain. Serafina observed the scene with tactical precision, assessing the situation as her grandfather's journal had taught her. 3 against 1. They were in wolf form, while she would need to remain human to use her knife. They had the advantages of speed, strength, and numbers. She had surprise and perhaps a few seconds of confusion when they realized what she was. The smart move would be to walk away. This wasn't her fight. The cub wasn't her responsibility. Interfering would likely get her killed. And for what? For a cub whose pack had clearly failed to protect it? For a society that had rejected her at every turn? Then the largest of the rogues, a mangy gray beast with a notched ear, locked its jaws around the cub's scruff, lifting the small animal off the ground. The cub's cries weakened, its struggles growing feeble, but its eyes remained open, looking directly at Serafina as if it somehow knew she was there. Those eyes, bright amber, even through the pain, held an intelligence and desperation that she couldn't ignore. "Hey!" Serafina shouted, stepping into the clearing before her mind could overrule her heart. "Get away from him!" The 3 rogues turned to look at her, momentarily surprised by the human voice. The largest one dropped the cub unceremoniously and shifted form, bones cracking and fur receding to reveal a tall man with a scarred face and cruel eyes. He was naked, unashamed, and clearly dangerous. "Well, well," he said, his voice rough like broken glass. "The moon goddess must be smiling on us today. First, we get to kill the little prince, and then we get a pretty little Omega to play with." His gaze raked over her, lingering on her strange coloring. "Though you're an odd-looking thing, aren't you? Like a corpse that forgot to die." "Prince?" Serafina's mind raced, white fur being hunted specifically by rogues. This wasn't just any cub. This was someone important, someone whose death would have political implications throughout the wolf territories. The realization only added to the danger of the situation. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, trying to keep her voice steady, while her eyes tracked the movements of the other 2 rogues, still in wolf form, who were now flanking her in a practiced hunting formation. "But you need to leave that cub alone and get out of here." The rogue leader laughed, and the other 2 shifted to human form as well, closing the circle around her. All 3 were scarred, muscular, and moved with the predatory grace of experienced killers. "Or what? You going to fight us, little ghost girl? You don't even have a pack." He inhaled deeply, scenting her. "I can smell it on you. You're nobody, nothing, and nobody's going to care when we're done with you." He was right. She was nobody. No pack would avenge her death. No one would even notice she was gone. But that cub, that tiny white wolf bleeding on the ground, was somebody, someone important enough that these rogues had specifically targeted him. And Serafina had spent 7 years being nobody, 7 years of walking past suffering because getting involved was too dangerous. She was tired of being nothing, tired of surviving when she'd stopped living years ago. "You're right," she said quietly, reaching into her pack while maintaining eye contact with the leader. "I am nobody, which means I've got nothing to lose." Her hand found the handle of her silver knife, and in one fluid motion, she lunged at the nearest rogue, aiming for the throat. The fight was brutal and desperate. Serafina was no warrior. She had basic self-defense training from her father, but she was a healer, not a fighter. The rogues were bigger, stronger, and trained to kill. She should have died within seconds of her first attack. But she had the advantage of surprise, and more importantly, she had years of accumulated rage fueling her movements, years of anger at a world that had treated her like garbage, at packs that had used her skills and then thrown her out, at the unfairness of being punished for things she couldn't control. She caught the first rogue in the throat, her knife finding the major artery before he could block. Hot blood sprayed across her face and chest as she twisted the blade and pulled it free. He went down, gurgling, hands clutching futilely at the wound. The second one grabbed her from behind, his claws raking across her ribs, tearing through cloth and flesh. Serafina screamed, but used the momentum to drive her elbow into his face, feeling the satisfying crunch of cartilage as his nose broke. When he loosened his grip, she spun and stabbed upward, catching him under the chin. The blade went through the soft tissue and into his brain. His eyes went blank before he collapsed. 2 down, but she was wounded and slowing. Blood soaked her shirt from the deep claw marks on her side. The leader, seeing his companions fall, shifted back to wolf form and lunged at her with terrifying speed. Seraphina tried to dodge, but she was too slow, too injured. His teeth sank into her shoulder, shaking her like a rag doll. She felt bones crack, felt her knife slip from nerveless fingers as white-hot pain lanced through her body. The wolf threw her against a tree trunk, and she hit hard, sliding down to the ground in a heap. Through blurring vision, she saw the rogue shifting back to human form, retrieving her fallen knife with a cruel smile. "Not bad for an Omega," he admitted, advancing slowly, savoring her helplessness. But this was always going to end one way. Beyond him, Seraphina could see the white cub, still struggling weakly to crawl away. She hadn't even managed to save him. All this pain, all this death, and she had failed anyway. Now her healing sense was screaming at her, cataloging her injuries with clinical precision. 3 broken ribs, punctured lung, shattered shoulder, deep lacerations across her abdomen, internal bleeding. She was dying. She had minutes at most. But her gift wasn't just for sensing injuries. It was for healing them. And healing, at its core, was simply the movement of life energy from one place to another, encouraging the body to repair itself faster than nature intended. She had been taught to be careful with it, to never push too hard, to never drain herself dangerously low. She had never been taught what happened if you pushed past all safety limits, if you gave everything. No healer lived to tell that tale. As the rogue approached with her own knife, Seraphina reached deep inside herself, past the reservoir of energy she normally used for healing, past the safety limits her parents had drilled into her, down to the very core of her life force. And she pulled. Power flooded through her, raw and primal and agonizing. This wasn't normal healing magic. This was something older, something her grandfather's journal had only hinted at in its oldest pages. Life weaving, the ability to take one's own life force and gift it to another. The ancient ritual required blood. With the last of her strength, Seraphina cut her wrist on a sharp stone beside her, then dragged herself toward the white cub. The rogue, confused by her movements, paused to watch with cruel amusement. "What are you doing, ghost girl? Trying to crawl away? There's nowhere to go." Seraphina ignored him, focusing only on reaching the cub. When her bloody hand touched the small wolf's wounded body, she pressed her bleeding wrist to a gash on its flank, creating a blood bond, life weaver to recipient. Then she channeled everything she had left, every spark of life energy, every moment she might have lived, pouring it into the small body beneath her hand. She felt bones knitting, tissues regenerating, vitality returning to the dying cub. The white fur began to glow with an ethereal light as ancient magic activated. "What the hell?" The rogue took a step back, suddenly uncertain. Seraphina smiled through blood-stained lips. "Run," she whispered to the cub, whose amber eyes were now clear and alert, wounds completely healed. To her surprise, the cub didn't run. Instead, it stood protectively over her failing body, hackles raised, teeth bared at the approaching rogue. A growl, surprisingly deep for such a small animal, rumbled from its chest. The rogue laughed. "Still trying to fight? I'll kill you both then." He never saw what hit him. A massive black wolf, easily twice the size of a normal alpha, burst from the trees with such speed that he was merely a dark blur. Powerful jaws closed around the rogue's throat, tearing it out in one savage motion. The rogue didn't even have time to scream before he was dead, his body collapsing in a heap as the enormous wolf stood over him, blood dripping from his muzzle. Seraphina stared at the newcomer through dimming vision. This was no ordinary wolf. This was an alpha king, one of the few wolves powerful enough to rule over multiple packs. She had heard stories of such wolves, but had never seen one. They were said to be as intelligent as they were lethal, the pinnacle of their species. The alpha approached slowly, his amber eyes, the same shade as the cub's, fixed on Seraphina with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her fading consciousness. The white cub whined and moved to meet the larger wolf, their noses touching in greeting. Father and son, Seraphina realized as her vision began to darken at the edges. She had saved a prince, the son of an alpha king. Perhaps her life had meant something after all. As consciousness slipped away, she felt the large wolf shift forms. Warm, strong hands lifted her gently, a deep voice speaking words she couldn't quite make out. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a pair of intense amber eyes looking down at her with something that might have been gratitude. Magnus Ironheart had been tracking his son's abductors for nearly 3 days without rest. The rogue wolves had struck during the full moon celebration, taking advantage of the festivities to snatch the young prince from his nursery. They had killed 2 guards and wounded 3 others in the process, making it clear this was no random kidnapping, but a calculated strike against the royal line. As Alpha King of the Northern Territories, Magnus had many enemies. Rival alphas who coveted his lands, former allies who resented his power, rogues who hated the very concept of pack law and order. Any of them might have orchestrated this attack. But kidnapping his son, his only child and heir, was a transgression that would be answered with blood. Magnus had left his most trusted beta, Commander Gideon, in charge of the kingdom while he personally led the hunt. Some had questioned the wisdom of the king himself undertaking such a dangerous mission, but Magnus had silenced them with a single look. Elias was his son, his responsibility. No one else would find him. No one else would bring him home. For 3 days, Magnus had followed the trail, pausing only when the scent became too faint to track. He slept in short bursts, ate whatever he could hunt quickly, and pushed himself beyond normal endurance. The physical toll was insignificant compared to the fear that gnawed at his insides. Elias was only 3 months old, still vulnerable, still learning to control his shifts between human and wolf form. If they killed his son, Magnus would not rest until he had hunted down and destroyed everyone connected to the crime. He would tear apart the entire forest if necessary. When he finally caught the fresh scent of his son mingled with blood, Magnus had abandoned all caution, racing through the trees with single-minded purpose. He had arrived just in time to witness something he had never seen before, a dying woman with hair like moonlight, somehow healing his mortally wounded son through what appeared to be ancient magic, the kind mentioned only in the oldest pack histories. The third rogue had died quickly, unworthy of even a moment's consideration once Magnus saw the state of the strange woman who had saved his son. He shifted back to human form and knelt beside her, gently lifting her broken body. Blood soaked her strange clothing, and her breathing was shallow and irregular, but it was her appearance that truly startled him. Hair white as fresh snow framed a face of ethereal paleness, blue veins visible beneath translucent skin, and though her eyes were now closed, he had seen their storm-gray color before she collapsed. She looked like something from the old tales his grandmother had told him. The blood moon curse, they had called it. The mark of the life weavers, a line of healers said to be blessed and cursed by the moon goddess herself. But the life weavers were supposed to be extinct, wiped out generations ago during the Great Purge, when superstition and fear had driven the packs to hunt down any wolf that seemed unnatural. If this woman truly was a life weaver, she was possibly the last of her kind, and she had saved his son at the cost of her own life. Elias, fully healed, pawed at the woman's limp hand, whining softly. The bond between them was palpable, a tangible connection created by the ancient blood ritual Magnus had witnessed. His son, who normally shied away from strangers, was clearly distressed by the woman's condition. "She saved you, didn't she?" Magnus murmured, examining the woman's wounds with growing concern. She had fought 3 rogues alone, killed 2 of them, and somehow managed to completely heal Elias while dying herself. It was beyond impressive. It was the act of a true warrior, regardless of her Omega status. Magnus made his decision instantly. He owed this woman a life debt. His son owed her everything. He carefully gathered her in his arms, mindful of her broken bones and torn flesh. "Elias," he said firmly to his son, "shift and follow. We're taking her home." The white wolf cub yipped once, then his small body contorted as he shifted into human form. A naked toddler with a mop of white blonde hair and his father's amber eyes. The shift would have been impossible with his previous injuries. Whatever magic the woman had used had fully restored him. "She hurts, Papa," Elias said, his small face creased with worry. "She gave me her good feelings. Now she has all the hurt." Magnus nodded gravely. "Yes, son. She sacrificed for you. Do you understand what that means?" Elias nodded solemnly. Like the stories, the greatest warrior gives everything to protect others. "That's right." Magnus adjusted his hold on the dying woman, feeling a strange connection forming. Not romantic or sexual, but something equally powerful, a warrior's bond, a life debt, something primal and unbreakable. And we never forget those who sacrifice for us. She is under our protection now. Together, father and son began the journey back to their territory, the woman cradled carefully in Magnus's arms. He pushed himself to move quickly without jostling her too badly, aware that every minute counted if she were to have any chance of survival. Elias trotted alongside, occasionally reaching up to touch the woman's dangling hand, as if reassuring himself that she was still there. After about an hour, the boy spoke again, his voice small but certain. "She's my mom now." Magnus looked down at his son in surprise. Elias had never known his birth mother, who had died during childbirth 3 months earlier. The loss had devastated Magnus, leaving a hole in his heart that seemed impossible to fill. He had never expected his son to form an attachment to anyone so quickly, especially not under these circumstances. "What makes you say that, Elias?" "She put her life in me. I can feel her here." The boy touched his chest. "That's what moms do, right? They give their life for their babies?" Magnus couldn't argue with the simple wisdom of his son's words. In the most fundamental sense, the woman had indeed performed the ultimate maternal act, sacrificing herself for a child not her own. The ancient blood bond between them now was, in many ways, as powerful as any biological connection. "If she lives," Magnus said carefully, "we'll see what she wants. It must be her choice, Elias. We can't force her to stay." "She'll stay," the boy said with absolute certainty. "She's alone like us. She needs a pack." Magnus wondered at his son's intuition. How did he know the woman was packless? Perhaps the blood bond had transferred more than just life energy. Perhaps some knowledge, some memories had flowed between them during that desperate moment. As they approached the border of their territory, Magnus howled, a specific sequence that identified him to the border guards. Within moments, wolves emerged from strategic positions among the trees, shifting to human form when they recognized their king and prince. "My lord!" The captain of the guard rushed forward, relief evident on his weathered face. "You found the prince! The entire kingdom has been searching!" He stopped abruptly when he noticed the bloody woman in Magnus's arms. "Who is this?" "She saved Elias from the rogues," Magnus replied tersely. "She's dying. Send runners ahead to the palace. I want Morwenna waiting with her full healing kit. Clear the royal wing and prepare my chambers for her." The captain's eyes widened at the mention of the royal chambers, but he was too well trained to question his king. He immediately dispatched 2 of his fastest runners to relay the orders. "And Captain," Magnus added as the man turned to organize the remaining guards for escort duty, "this woman is to be treated with the same respect you would show me or my son. She is under royal protection. Make that clear to everyone." The journey back to the palace was a blur of forest paths and concerned faces. News of the prince's rescue spread quickly through the territory, and wolves gathered along the route, shifting to human form to bow as their king passed with his precious burdens. Many looked curiously at the strange white-haired woman, but none dared comment on her presence in the king's arms. By the time they reached the palace, a massive structure built into the side of a mountain, with stone walls and wooden towers that blended harmoniously with the surrounding forest, Magnus could barely feel the woman's pulse. Her skin had gone from pale to gray, her breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible. Morwenna, the royal healer, waited at the entrance, her ancient face deeply lined with concern. Beside her stood Commander Gideon, Magnus's most trusted advisor and friend since childhood. "My king!" Gideon started, clearly relieved to see both Magnus and Elias safe, but his eyes quickly fixed on the dying woman. "Who is—" "Later," Magnus cut him off, striding past them toward the royal wing. "Morwenna, with me. Now." The old healer hurried after him, surprisingly spry despite her advanced age. As they entered the king's chambers, servants scrambled to pull back the covers on the massive bed and bring basins of hot water and clean cloths. "Everyone out," Magnus ordered, once he had gently placed the woman on his bed. The servants disappeared immediately, leaving only Magnus, Morwenna, and Elias in the room. Morwenna approached the bed and gasped when she got her first clear look at the woman's face. "By the moon goddess," she whispered, her gnarled hands trembling as she touched the woman's silver-white hair. "A life weaver. I never thought I'd see one in my lifetime." "Can you save her?" Magnus asked, cutting straight to what mattered. The old healer's face grew grave as she examined the woman's injuries. "She's lost too much blood. Internal bleeding, punctured lung, multiple fractures. And there's something else. Morwenna placed her hands over the woman's heart, closing her eyes in concentration. Her life force is almost completely drained. It's as if her soul itself is damaged. "She gave it to me," Elias piped up from where he stood beside the bed, his small hand holding the woman's limp fingers. "She made me better when I was broken." Morwenna's eyes widened in understanding. A full life transference, the ancient rite. She looked at Magnus with newfound respect. This woman performed the most sacred and dangerous healing magic known to our kind. She gave her life force to save your son. "Then we must give it back," Magnus said firmly. The old healer shook her head sadly. "It doesn't work that way, my king. Life force freely given cannot be returned. That is the nature of the sacrifice." "There must be something we can do," Magnus insisted, surprising himself with the intensity of his concern for this stranger. He owed her everything, and he would not stand by and watch her die. "Morwenna, you have studied the old ways longer than anyone. Think." The ancient healer was silent for a long moment, her wrinkled fingers gently probing the woman's wounds. Finally, she sighed heavily. "There is one possibility, but it is dangerous and forbidden. The blood moon ritual, a life force sharing between compatible wolves. It would require your blood, my king, and a portion of your own life force. It would weaken you temporarily, perhaps for months, and create a permanent bond between you." "Do it," Magnus said without hesitation. Morwenna looked at him sharply. "My king, you don't understand. This would be no ordinary bond. It would connect you on the deepest level, sharing emotions, sometimes thoughts. Your wolves would recognize each other as pack, as family. It cannot be broken once formed." Magnus looked down at the dying woman who had given everything to save his son. He thought of her courage, facing 3 rogues alone. He remembered the flash of her gray eyes before she collapsed, filled with pain, but also peace, as if saving Elias had somehow redeemed her own life in her final moments. He knew nothing about her beyond what he had witnessed in those few moments, yet he felt a connection, a sense of recognition that transcended rational explanation. She was a warrior in the truest sense, regardless of her Omega status or strange appearance. "She is already bonded to my son through her sacrifice," Magnus said quietly. "That makes her pack. Do the ritual, Morwenna." The old healer nodded once, then moved with sudden efficiency. "I need silver bowl, moonstone powder, and your ceremonial knife," she instructed, already pulling vials from the pouch at her belt. While Magnus retrieved the items from a carved wooden chest near his bed, Morwenna cut away the woman's bloody clothing to better access her wounds. Despite her grave injuries, there was a delicate strength to her form, the lean muscle of someone who had survived hard times through sheer determination. "What is her name?" Morwenna asked as she mixed herbs in the silver bowl. "I don't know," Magnus admitted. "She was unconscious when I found her." Morwenna frowned. "Names have power in the old rituals. We should use hers if possible." Elias, who had been quietly holding the woman's hand throughout their conversation, suddenly spoke. "Seraphina. Her name is Seraphina Silverwind." Both adults turned to stare at the small boy. "How do you know that, child?" Morwenna asked gently. "She told me, not with words." Elias touched his head, then his heart. "In here, when she gave me her good feelings, I saw things. Her name, people being mean because of her hair, being alone for a long time." Magnus and Morwenna exchanged significant glances. The blood bond between Seraphina and Elias was clearly stronger than either had anticipated, allowing some form of memory or knowledge transfer. "Seraphina Silverwind," Morwenna repeated, rolling the name on her tongue as if tasting its power. "Silverwind was one of the great healing families before the Purge. I thought they had all been destroyed." "Apparently not," Magnus said, handing Morwenna the silver bowl and ceremonial knife, an ornate blade with the royal crest engraved on the hilt. The ritual that followed was ancient and primal. Morwenna sliced Magnus's palm with the ceremonial knife, letting his blood drip into the silver bowl already filled with herbs and moonstone powder. She did the same to Seraphina, cutting her uninjured wrist with practiced precision. As their blood mingled in the bowl, Morwenna chanted in the old tongue, words that few now remembered, but which had been passed down through her lineage for generations. She dipped her fingers in the mixture and drew symbols on Seraphina's forehead, chest, and palms. She did the same to Magnus, completing the circuit between them. "By blood and bond, by moon and pack, I bind these souls in sacred trust," Morwenna intoned. "Life shared is life strengthened. The Alpha gives freely as the Omega once gave. Balance is restored. The circle is complete." Magnus felt the exact moment the bond formed. It was like a door suddenly opening in his mind, a rush of foreign sensations and emotions flooding through him. Pain, so much pain, but also a profound loneliness that staggered him with its intensity. 7 years of rejection and solitude compressed into a single crushing weight. He gasped, staggering slightly as the room spun around him. He felt weaker than he had in years, as if he had run for days without rest. But beneath his hands, which Morwenna had placed on Serafina's sternum, he could feel a change. Her breathing deepened. Her pulse strengthened. Color, still pale but no longer deathly gray, returned to her cheeks. "It's working," Morwenna confirmed, her ancient eyes alight with wonder. "The bond has taken hold." Elias climbed onto the bed and curled up next to Serafina, his small body pressing against her side. "She's coming back," he said with satisfaction. Magnus sat heavily in the chair beside the bed, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The life force transfer had taken more out of him than he had expected. But watching the steady rise and fall of Serafina's chest, seeing the worst of her wounds already beginning to heal, he knew he would make the same choice again without hesitation. "She will sleep for many days," Morwenna warned, beginning to clean and bandage the external wounds that still needed treatment. "Her body must rebuild what was lost, and you, my king, must rest as well. You have given her a significant portion of your strength." Magnus nodded wearily, but made no move to leave the chair. "I'll stay with her. With them," he amended, looking at his son curled protectively around the unconscious woman. "As you wish, my king." Morwenna gathered her supplies. "I will return in an hour to check on her progress, and perhaps then you will tell me the full story of how a life weaver came to save our prince." After the healer left, Magnus leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the 2 figures on his bed. His son, safe and whole thanks to this strange woman, and Serafina Silverwind, the last of a bloodline thought extinct, now inexorably bound to his family through ancient magic and willing sacrifice. He had no idea what would happen when she woke. Would she be angry about the bond formed without her conscious consent? Would she try to leave once she recovered? Or would she recognize, as he did, that fate had drawn them together for a purpose greater than either could have imagined? Through the newly formed bond, Magnus could sense her presence in his mind, distant and dim while she remained unconscious, but undeniably there. Not a mate bond, which would have been different, more primal and possessive. This was something equally powerful but distinct, a warrior's bond, a life debt, sacred and unbreakable. Magnus reached out and gently touched the silver-white hair spread across his pillow. "Welcome to the pack, Serafina Silverwind," he murmured. "Whether you wanted it or not, you're one of us now." Outside the window, the moon began to rise, casting silver light across the bed. For the first time in 3 months, since the death of his mate and the birth of his son, Magnus Ironheart felt a sense of completeness, of rightness, as if a missing piece had finally fallen into place. The Life Weaver had returned to the royal pack, just as the oldest prophecies had foretold. What that would mean for the future of the Wolf Kingdoms remained to be seen, but Magnus had a feeling their lives had changed irrevocably, and that the coming days would test them all in ways they could not yet imagine. Darkness surrounded Serafina, a comfortable void where pain could not reach her. In this emptiness, memories floated like autumn leaves on still water, her parents teaching her healing arts beside a crackling fire, the night of screaming when rogues tore through their small settlement, the following morning when her pack elders pointed toward the border, refusing to meet her strange gray eyes as they exiled a 15-year-old girl for the crime of looking different. 7 years of wandering followed, 7 years of offering her healing gifts to packs who valued her skills but never her presence. Always the outsider, always moving on before attachment could form, before the whispers of bad omen and ghost girl became too loud to ignore. Then came the forest clearing, the wounded white wolf cub, the decision that changed everything. The darkness around her shifted, no longer empty but filled with a steady presence, warm and solid. a tether anchoring her to life when she should have drifted away. Sometimes she heard voices, a child's high, excited tones, a man's deep rumble, an old woman's knowledgeable murmur. They spoke about her, around her, occasionally to her, though she could not respond. And through it all, a strange new awareness pulsed at the edges of her consciousness. Another heartbeat echoing alongside her own, another presence connected to her in ways she did not understand. Serafina's return to consciousness was gradual, like dawn breaking over a mountain ridge. First came sensation, soft linens against her skin, far more luxurious than anything she had felt in years. Then scent, clean air perfumed with medicinal herbs and pine. Then sound, a crackling fireplace, soft breathing nearby, the distant calls of wolves communicating across territory. When she finally opened her eyes, the room around her slowly came into focus. High stone ceilings with wooden beams, wall tapestries depicting wolves hunting beneath full moons, a massive fireplace with flames casting dancing shadows, and windows, tall and arched, showing darkened forest and star-filled sky beyond. This was no ordinary dwelling. This was a place of power and permanence. "You're awake." Serafina turned her head toward the deep voice, wincing at muscles stiff from disuse. A man sat in a chair beside her bed, his massive frame making the furniture seem small by comparison. Even seated, she could tell he stood well over 6 feet tall, his body honed by years of combat and leadership. His face might have been carved from granite, strong jaw, high cheekbones, straight nose, but it was his eyes that held her attention. Amber like the finest whiskey, watchful and intelligent, they studied her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable. Yet strangely it did not. Serafina tried to speak, but her throat was parched, her voice a raspy whisper. "Where am I?" The man rose and poured water from a pitcher into a silver cup, then carefully helped her sit up enough to drink. His hands were surprisingly gentle for their size, supporting her with minimal pressure against her healing wounds. "The royal palace of the Northern Territories," he answered once she had taken several sips. "My home. I am Magnus Ironheart, Alpha King of these lands." Memory flooded back, the rogues, the fight, the white cub bleeding in the forest dirt. "The prince," she said urgently. "Did he—" "My son is alive and completely healed, thanks to you." Magnus's expression softened slightly. "Elias has barely left your side these past 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Serafina tried to sit up further, shocked by the passage of time, but pain lanced through her chest and shoulder. "Easy," Magnus cautioned, helping her settle back against the pillows. "Your wounds were extensive. You should have died in that forest." "I intended to," Serafina admitted quietly. "The life transference ritual is meant to be final. My life for his. I don't understand how I survived." Magnus's expression turned solemn. "I could not allow the woman who saved my son to die, not when there was a way to prevent it." Something in his tone made Serafina study him more carefully. There was a weight to his words, an implication she couldn't quite grasp, and beneath it all that strange awareness of his presence that seemed to vibrate in her mind. "What did you do?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "The blood moon ritual," came another voice from the doorway. An elderly woman entered, her white hair braided elaborately around her head, her movements spry despite her advanced years. A life force sharing between compatible wolves, quite dangerous and generally forbidden, but necessary under the circumstances. Serafina stared at the newcomer, then back at Magnus, understanding dawning with horrified clarity. "You bound our life forces without my consent?" "You were dying," Magnus stated, unapologetic. "And you had already bound yourself to my son through your sacrifice. The ritual merely extended that connection to me, allowing me to share enough life force to save you." "It's not merely a life force connection," Serafina argued, anger flaring. "The blood moon ritual creates a permanent bond. I can feel you in my mind even now." The elderly woman approached the bed, setting down a basket of herbs and bandages. "I am Morwenna, royal healer to the Ironheart Pack. And yes, child, the bond is permanent. But consider the alternative." She fixed Serafina with a stern look. "Would you prefer we had let you die?" "Perhaps," Serafina said quietly. "It was my choice to make. "And it was my choice whether to accept your death as payment for my son's life," Magnus countered, his deep voice rumbling with the hint of a growl. "I chose otherwise." Before Serafina could respond, the door burst open and a small, white-blonde whirlwind rushed into the room. "She's awake!" The small boy, recognizable as the wolf cub she had saved despite his human form, clambered onto the bed with childish disregard for propriety. "Mother's awake!" Serafina froze at the title, looking to Magnus in alarm. The Alpha King sighed. "Elias, we discussed this. Lady Silverwind is not—" "She is," the boy insisted stubbornly, small chin jutting forward in a miniature version of his father's determined expression. "She gave me her life. That's what mothers do." Morwenna chuckled softly. "Out of the mouths of cubs," she murmured, busying herself with arranging herbs. Serafina found herself looking into earnest amber eyes, so similar to Magnus's, but filled with childlike hope rather than controlled power. Small hands reached for hers, and she felt the echo of their blood bond, the magical connection created when she had transferred her life force to save him. "I'm not really your mother," she said gently. "Your mother was someone else." Elias shook his head. "She died when I was born. I never knew her, but I know you." He touched his chest. "In here. You gave me your memories when you saved me." Serafina's eyes widened in shock. The life transference ritual was not supposed to transfer memories. Yet she could feel the truth of his words, sense the connection between them that went beyond mere magic. "What do you remember?" she asked cautiously. "You were alone for a long time. People were mean because of your hair. You helped them anyway, even though they didn't say thank you." Elias tilted his head, studying her with disconcerting perception. "You were sad for so long, but you're not alone anymore. You have me now, and Father." Serafina glanced at Magnus, who was watching the interaction with unreadable eyes. "Your father and I don't know each other, Elias. The bond between us was created by magic, not by choice." "But you chose to save me," Elias pointed out with simple logic. "And Father chose to save you. That's how family starts." Morwenna intervened before Serafina could formulate a response to this child's disarmingly straightforward worldview. "That's enough excitement for now, young prince. Your new mother needs to rest and heal. Why don't you go to your lessons with Commander Gideon? You can visit again this evening." Though Elias pouted, he obeyed after extracting a promise from Serafina that she wouldn't go away while he was gone. After the boy departed, an awkward silence filled the chamber. "I should examine your wounds," Morwenna said finally, turning down the blankets to reveal bandages wrapped around Serafina's torso. "The king will give us privacy." Magnus nodded, moving toward the door, but he paused before leaving, his amber gaze finding Serafina's gray one. "Whatever you may think of what I did, know this. You have a place here for as long as you wish it. You saved my son. That makes you Pack, regardless of any magical bond." After he left, Morwenna helped Serafina sit up fully so she could remove the bandages. "He's not usually so talkative," the old healer commented. "You've made quite an impression." Serafina winced as the bandages pulled at healing flesh. "By almost dying?" "By being willing to die for a child you didn't know." Morwenna's gnarled fingers were gentle but efficient as they probed Serafina's wounds. "And by being what you are." "What am I exactly?" Morwenna paused, giving Serafina a shrewd look. "You really don't know, do you? Your parents never told you about your lineage?" "They died when I was 15. There was much they never had time to explain." Serafina looked down at her body, noting the nearly healed gashes and the pink scar tissue forming where there should have been fatal wounds. "I know I'm a healer. I know my appearance has always made others uncomfortable. What else should I know?" The old woman sighed, applying a fragrant salve to the healing cuts. "You are a life weaver, child, the first I've seen in over 60 years. Your family, the Silverwinds, were once the most revered healers in the wolf territories, royal advisors, battle medics, keepers of the old knowledge." Serafina stared at her. "If my family was so revered, why was I treated like a pariah by every pack I encountered?" "Because knowledge becomes fear, becomes hatred over time," Morwenna said sadly. "When the life weavers began to decline in numbers, rumors spread that they were cursed. The white hair, the pale skin, these became seen as marks of the moon goddess's disfavor rather than her blessing. During the Great Purge 70 years ago, most were hunted down and killed." "Why?" Serafina asked, horrified. "Why kill healers?" Power and superstition make dangerous companions. Some alpha lines feared the Life Weaver's abilities, particularly after a prophecy emerged that the return of the Life Weavers would shift the balance of power in the territories. Morwenna rewrapped clean bandages around Seraphina's torso. Your survival is more significant than you realize. There is an old saying, when silver blood flows once more, the kingdom will stand strong or fall forever. Seraphina absorbed this information in stunned silence. All her life, she had believed her appearance was simply an unfortunate genetic anomaly, her healing abilities a random gift. To learn she was part of a nearly extinct lineage of powerful healers, that she might be the last of her kind, was overwhelming. Does Magnus know this? Is that why he performed the blood moon ritual? Morwenna's lips curved in a small smile. The king performed the ritual because he could not bear to let his son's savior die. The fact that you are a life weaver merely adds historical significance to an already extraordinary situation. The old healer helped Seraphina into a clean nightgown, then encouraged her to rest. But sleep proved elusive as Seraphina's mind whirled with new information and complex emotions. She was alive when she should be dead, bound to an alpha king and his son through ancient magic, possibly the last of a nearly extinct bloodline. And somewhere in the palace, connected to her through a mental bond she didn't fully understand, was a powerful ruler who had made decisions about her life without her consent. Despite her physical weakness, Seraphina was determined to explore her surroundings at the first opportunity. She needed to understand this new situation from all angles before deciding her next steps. That opportunity came the following morning when Morwenna declared her strong enough for a short walk. The old healer provided a simple dress of soft gray wool that complemented Seraphina's coloring rather than attempting to hide it, a novel experience for someone accustomed to trying to blend into shadows. With Morwenna's steadying hand, Seraphina ventured from the royal chambers for the first time. She realized she had been recuperating in the king's own bed, a thought that brought a flush to her cheeks. Where had Magnus slept these past 2 weeks? The palace was a marvel of natural integration with the surrounding landscape. Built partially into a mountainside, its corridors were a blend of carved stone and polished wood. Windows and skylights allowed natural illumination, while torches and fireplaces provided additional warmth and light. Members of the royal pack moved through the halls with purpose, many nodding respectfully to Morwenna and regarding Seraphina with curious but not hostile glances. "They know who I am," Seraphina observed quietly. "Of course," Morwenna confirmed. "You saved their prince, and the king himself brought you here, unconscious and bloody, then performed an ancient ritual to save your life. Court gossip travels faster than wildfire." Their tour took them past training yards where warriors practiced combat in both human and wolf forms, through kitchens where dozens of workers prepared meals for the large pack, past gardens where herbs and vegetables grew in carefully tended beds, and finally to a massive library with shelves stretching 2 stories high. "I thought you might appreciate this," Morwenna said, watching Seraphina's expression closely. "Magnus mentioned you had a healer's journal with you when he found you." Seraphina's hand moved instinctively to her side where her pack should have been. "My grandfather's journal, is it safe?" Morwenna assured her, "along with your other possessions, but I thought you might be interested in expanding your knowledge." She gestured to a section of ancient-looking texts. These contain the collected wisdom of healers going back 20 generations, including some written by your ancestors. Seraphina approached the shelves with reverence, her fingers hovering over leather bindings embossed with familiar symbols, the same blue moon mark that adorned her silver knife. "These are Silverwind texts," she breathed. "Indeed. Rescued before they could be destroyed during the purge." Morwenna pulled a particular volume from the shelf. "This might interest you most. It details the life-weaving techniques that you instinctively performed to save Prince Elias." Seraphina accepted this book, opening it carefully to find pages filled with diagrams and text describing the very rituals she had used in desperation. "I didn't know what I was doing," she admitted. "I just reached for whatever power I could find to save him." "That instinct is part of your bloodline's gift," Morwenna explained. "The knowledge lives in your blood even without formal training. But imagine what you could accomplish with proper education." Before Seraphina could respond, a new voice joined their conversation. "I see our guest has ventured out of bed." Both women turned to find a tall, distinguished-looking man entering the library. Unlike Magnus's raw physical power, this wolf carried himself with aristocratic elegance. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, his features refined rather than rugged. But something in his pale blue eyes made Seraphina instinctively wary. "Lord Darius," Morwenna acknowledged with a stiff nod, "may I present Lady Seraphina Silverwind, savior of Prince Elias." "The mysterious life weaver," Darius said, approaching with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The entire kingdom speaks of nothing else. How fortunate that you happened upon our young prince in his moment of need." There was an implication in his tone that Seraphina didn't miss. "Fortunate for the prince, certainly," she replied carefully. "And for you, it seems, from wandering Omega to royal guest. Quite a change in circumstances." He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that seemed courtly but felt invasive. "Darius Bloodfang, brother to the king and royal advisor, welcome to our home." As his skin touched hers, Seraphina's healing sense flared unexpectedly. Where most healthy wolves registered as steady, vibrant energy to her senses, Darius felt wrong. There was a darkness wrapped around his life force, something artificial and malevolent. She pulled her hand back, struggling to keep her expression neutral. "Thank you for the welcome, Lord Bloodfang." Darius's eyes narrowed slightly at her quick withdrawal. "I understand my brother has created quite a unique bond with you. The blood moon ritual hasn't been performed in generations. Some might consider it reckless." Morwenna stiffened beside Seraphina. "The king acted to save a life, as is his right and privilege." "Of course," Darius agreed smoothly. "I merely wonder at the consequences of binding royal blood to an unknown Omega, no matter how unusually gifted." His gaze lingered on Seraphina's silver-white hair. "History tells us the life weavers were not always the benefactors legend paints them to be." "History is written by the victors, Lord Bloodfang," Seraphina replied, maintaining eye contact despite her instinct to look away. "And those who fear what they don't understand often create monsters where there are none." Something dangerous flashed in Darius's eyes before he masked it with another empty smile. "How philosophical. I can see why my brother finds you intriguing." He bowed slightly. "I won't keep you from your exploration. I'm sure we'll have ample opportunity to become better acquainted in the days ahead." After he departed, Seraphina released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He doesn't like me." "Darius doesn't like anyone who has Magnus's attention," Morwenna said bluntly. As second son, he has always lived in his brother's shadow. When Magnus became Alpha King 15 years ago, Darius expected to be named heir presumptive. Then Elias was born, and those hopes were dashed. "He resents the child?" "He would never admit as much, but yes." Morwenna's aged eyes followed the direction Darius had gone. "Be careful around him, Seraphina. Darius is subtle and patient in his ambitions, more dangerous than outright enemies who declare themselves." The warning added to Seraphina's growing unease about her situation. She was recovering in a royal palace filled with political undercurrents she barely understood, bound to the king through magic, and now apparently a target for the king's brother's suspicion. Perhaps sensing her distress through their bond, Magnus found them in the library a short while later. Unlike his brother's calculated elegance, the Alpha King moved with the natural confidence of one accustomed to command. His massive frame filled the doorway before he entered, amber eyes immediately finding Seraphina among the shelves. "Morwenna," he acknowledged with a nod, "I see our guest is well enough for exploration." "Lady Silverwind is healing remarkably quickly," the old healer confirmed, "though she should not overexert herself." Magnus approached, studying Seraphina with that intense gaze that somehow felt both invasive and reassuring. Through their bond, she sensed not his thoughts, but his general emotional state, concern, curiosity, and a steadfast sense of purpose. "I met your brother," Seraphina said without preamble. Something darkened in Magnus's expression. "Darius can be difficult. Did he say anything to disturb you?" "Only implied that binding yourself to an unknown Omega was reckless and potentially dangerous." Magnus snorted. "My brother has always excelled at political maneuvering, but he forgets that I am king, and my decisions are not subject to his approval." His gaze softened slightly. "How are you feeling?" The simple question caught Seraphina off guard. She was unaccustomed to genuine concern from others, especially powerful alphas who typically viewed Omegas as beneath their notice. Better than someone who should be dead has any right to feel. she answered honestly, "but confused, overwhelmed. I don't understand my place here." Magnus gestured to a reading area with comfortable chairs near a fireplace. Once they were seated, Morwenna discreetly withdrawing to give them privacy, he spoke with the direct manner that seemed characteristic of him. "Your place is whatever you wish it to be. You saved my son's life at great personal cost. That earns you a permanent home here, should you want it. The bond between us complicates matters, but it doesn't change the fundamental truth. You are free to choose your own path." Serafina studied him, trying to reconcile this powerful alpha's words with her experience of alpha behavior. "And if I choose to leave once I've recovered?" Something flashed in Magnus's eyes, disappointment perhaps, or concern, but his voice remained steady. "Then you leave. I won't hold you against your will, bond or no bond, though I should warn you that distance will make the bond uncomfortable for both of us, and Elias would be devastated." The mention of the young prince tugged at something in Serafina's chest. Through their blood connection, she had formed an attachment to the boy that transcended rational explanation. "He calls me mother," she said quietly. Magnus sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I've tried to explain to him that it's inappropriate, but he's stubborn. His birth mother, my mate Elena, died during childbirth. He has no memory of her. When you saved him through the life transfer ritual, it created a connection he interprets in the simplest terms. You gave life to him, therefore you are his mother." "Children see truth more clearly than adults sometimes," Serafina mused. Then, changing subjects abruptly, "Morwenna says I'm a life weaver, that my family was once important to the wolf kingdoms." Magnus's expression turned solemn. "The Silverwinds were advisors to my own ancestors for generations. During the Great Purge, most of the Lifeweaver bloodlines were wiped out by fear and superstition. I had thought them extinct until I found you." "Why did you really save me, Magnus? Was it truly gratitude, or was it because of what I am?" The Alpha King held her gaze steadily. "I saved you because you saved my son. Your bloodline merely adds significance to a decision already made." He leaned forward slightly. "But I would be lying if I said I didn't recognize the potential importance of a life weaver returning to the royal pack after so many years. There are prophecies. When silver blood flows once more, the kingdom will stand strong or fall forever," Serafina quoted. Morwenna mentioned it. Magnus nodded. "There is unrest in the territories. Rogue packs grow bolder. Ancient alliances fracture. The attack on Elias was no random violence, but a calculated attempt to destabilize my rule by eliminating my heir." His jaw tightened at the memory. "Your appearance at this precise moment seems significant." Serafina considered his words carefully. "I'm just a wandering healer, Magnus, not some prophesied savior." "Perhaps. Or perhaps you are exactly where fate intended you to be." He rose, towering over her seated form. "Rest. Recover. Learn what you can from the library. When you are stronger, we will speak again of your place here and what the future might hold." As he turned to leave, Serafina called after him. "The bond between us, what exactly does it entail? I can sense your emotions, your general presence. Is it the same for you?" Magnus paused in the doorway. "Yes. I sense your confusion, your wariness, your curiosity. It will grow stronger as you recover." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It can be muted with practice and discipline. I've had years of training in mental barriers as Alpha King. I can teach you if you wish." "I would appreciate that." After Magnus departed, Serafina remained in the library, thoughts churning. She had awakened to a world more complex than she could have imagined. A world where her strange appearance wasn't a curse, but a heritage. Where ancient prophecies and political machinations swirled around her simply because of her bloodline. Where a powerful Alpha King and his son had formed magical bonds with her that transcended normal pack relationships. She turned her attention to the ancient texts Morwenna had shown her, determination settling in her heart. If she was to navigate this new reality, she needed knowledge. And if she truly was one of the last life weavers, she owed it to her ancestors, and perhaps to herself, to understand what that truly meant. Days passed, turning into weeks as Serafina regained her strength. She divided her time between the library, where she devoured knowledge about her heritage and abilities, and the healing wing, where Morwenna began teaching her advanced techniques that built upon her innate talents. To her surprise, The pack members treated her with respect, bordering on reverence, once word spread about her identity as a life weaver. The very traits that had made her an outcast elsewhere, her silver-white hair and storm-gray eyes, now marked her as someone special, someone historically significant to the Northern Territories. Elias visited her daily, usually dragging along his long-suffering tutor, Commander Gideon, a gruff but kind-hearted warrior who clearly adored the young prince despite his pretense of sternness. The boy was insatiably curious about Seraphina's healing abilities and delighted in showing her every corner of the palace and grounds. Magnus kept a respectful distance, allowing her space to adjust, though their bond meant she was always vaguely aware of his presence in the palace. They shared occasional meals and conversations, gradually becoming more comfortable with the strange connection between them. True to his word, he began teaching her techniques to control the mental bond, to create privacy when needed while maintaining the life-sustaining connection. It was during one such lesson, 3 weeks after she had awakened, that a messenger burst into Magnus's study, where they sat in meditative postures before the fire. "My king," the young beta said, breathing hard from running. "There's been an attack on the Eastern Border Patrol. Multiple casualties. The survivors are being brought to the healing wing now." Magnus was on his feet instantly, all traces of calm meditation vanishing. "Who attacked them? Rogues?" "No, my king. They bore the mark of the Shadowclaw pack. And there was something else." The messenger hesitated, glancing nervously at Seraphina. "Speak freely," Magnus ordered. "The bodies of our fallen. They were marked with strange symbols. And their wounds. Healer Morwenna said she's never seen anything like it, as if their life force was somehow extracted." Seraphina felt a chill run down her spine. The description matched forbidden techniques described in the darkest texts she had discovered in the library. Blood magic that perverted the life weaver's gift, taking life rather than giving it. Magnus's gaze met hers, and she knew he had made the same connection. Without a word, they both hurried to the healing wing, their earlier lesson forgotten. The scene that greeted them was one of controlled chaos. Wounded warriors lay on beds and pallets, attended by Morwenna and her assistants. The injuries were unlike anything Seraphina had seen before. Not clean wounds from teeth or claws, but withered flesh that resembled extreme aging, as if decades of life had been drained away in moments. Morwenna looked up as they entered, her aged face grim. "Blood magic," she confirmed. "The ancient perversion of life-weaving." Seraphina moved immediately to the nearest wounded warrior, placing her hands over his chest. Her healing sense recoiled at what she found. Not just physical damage, but spiritual diminishment, as if part of his essential self had been torn away. "I can heal the bodies," she said quietly to Magnus, "but the spirit damage, I'm not sure." "Do what you can," he replied, his voice tight with controlled rage. He turned to Commander Gideon, who had arrived shortly after them. "Double the border patrols, no one travels alone, and find out everything you can about Shadowclaw's recent movements." As the commander departed to carry out orders, Seraphina began the exhausting work of healing the wounded. She drew on techniques learned from the ancient texts, channeling her energy not just into physical repairs, but into spiritual restoration. It was delicate, demanding work that left her drained after each patient. Hours later, she had stabilized the worst cases, but knew they would need ongoing treatment. As she washed blood from her hands in a basin, Magnus approached, his face etched with concern. "You've pushed yourself too hard," he observed, steadying her when she swayed slightly from exhaustion. "I'm fine," she insisted, though the bond between them would reveal the lie. "What I don't understand is how Shadowclaw acquired knowledge of blood magic. Those techniques were supposed to have been lost during the purge." Magnus's expression darkened. "Someone has been studying the forbidden arts. Someone with access to ancient knowledge." A terrible suspicion formed in Seraphina's mind. She remembered the wrongness she had sensed in Darius's life force, the darkness wrapped around it like a parasite. But accusing the king's brother of blood magic without proof would be dangerous indeed. "The symbols carved into the victims," she said instead. "I need to see them." Magnus led her to a separate chamber where the bodies of the fallen had been prepared for the ceremonial burning that wolf packs used to honor their dead. With gentle reverence, Seraphina examined the strange markings carved into the cold flesh. They were perversions of the sacred symbols she had been studying, Lifeweaver runes twisted into darker meanings. "These are corruption sigils," she explained, tracing the air above one particularly complex design. "They're meant to channel life force from the victim to the practitioner. It's the opposite of what I did to save Elias. Instead of giving life, it steals it." Magnus's hands clenched into fists. "Shadowclaw has never shown interest in ancient magic before. They're traditional warriors who value physical strength above all else." "Then perhaps they have a new advisor," Seraphina suggested carefully. "Someone knowledgeable in old ways." Before Magnus could respond, Morwenna entered the chamber, her expression grave. "You should come quickly. There's something you need to see." They followed the old healer back to the main healing wing, where she led them to a wounded beta who had just regained consciousness. The man's face was gray with exhaustion, but his eyes widened with recognition when he saw Seraphina. "The silver-haired one," he whispered. "They asked about you, demanded to know if the rumors were true." Seraphina froze. "What rumors?" "That a life weaver had returned to the Ironheart Pack, that the king had bound himself to her through ancient ritual." The warrior coughed weakly. "Their leader. He said they would pay handsomely for you, dead or alive." Magnus growled, the sound rumbling from deep in his chest. "Who led the attack? Was it Alpha Reiner of Shadowclaw?" The warrior shook his head. "No, my king. It was Lord Darius. Your brother stood with the Shadowclaw Alphas. He's the one who performed the blood magic. He's the one who wants the Life Weaver." Silence fell over the healing wing at this revelation. Through their bond, Seraphina felt Magnus's shock transform into a cold, controlled rage more dangerous than any outburst. "You're certain of this?" Magnus asked, his voice deceptively calm. "I saw him with my own eyes, my king. He wore Shadowclaw colors, but I would know your brother anywhere." The warrior's voice broke. He smiled as he carved the symbols into our fallen, said it was necessary preparation for something greater. Magnus turned to Commander Gideon, who had returned during their examination of the bodies. "Find my brother, now. Bring him to the throne room under guard." As Gideon departed with a squad of warriors, Seraphina touched Magnus's arm gently. Through their bond, she projected calm despite her own turbulent emotions. "Magnus, if Darius is truly practicing blood magic, he's extremely dangerous. You can't confront him directly." "He is my brother and my subject," Magnus replied, voice like granite. "He has committed treason against his king and crimes against his own pack. Justice must be served." "I understand, but blood magic corrupts the practitioner. The Darius we face now may not be the brother you knew." Seraphina hesitated, then added, "And we need to consider Elias's safety. If Darius is targeting life weavers, and the prince and I share a blood bond." Understanding dawned in Magnus's eyes, followed by fresh alarm. Without another word, they both hurried from the healing wing toward the royal chambers, where Elias should have been preparing for bed under the watchful eye of his nursemaid. The corridors seemed longer than ever as they ran, Seraphina ignoring the pain of still healing wounds in her fear for the child who had somehow become precious to her in the short weeks of their acquaintance. Through their bond, she could feel Magnus's terror for his son, though his face remained a mask of controlled determination. When they reached the royal wing, the silence was their first warning. No guards stood at their posts. The door to Elias's chamber stood partially open, no light visible within. Magnus pushed Seraphina behind him as they approached, his body already beginning the partial transformation that gave him claws and enhanced strength while maintaining human form. He pushed the door open fully, revealing a room in disarray, furniture overturned, bedding torn, signs of struggle everywhere. In the center of the room, Elias's nursemaid lay motionless, a pool of blood spreading beneath her body. Beside her was a message written in the same blood. "Blood calls to blood, the life weaver's heart for the prince's life. Come alone to the sacred grove at midnight." Magnus roared, a sound of pure anguish that shook the stone walls. Through their bond, Seraphina felt his rage and fear like a physical blow. She staggered under the emotional onslaught, but forced herself to remain clear-headed. "We'll get him back," she said firmly, gripping Magnus's arm. "Darius won't harm Elias until he has what he wants. And what he wants is me." Magnus turned to her, his eyes now glowing with alpha power, his voice distorted by partially transformed vocal cords. "I will tear him apart for this, brother or not." "That's what he's counting on. Your rage making you careless." Seraphina gestured to the bloody message. "This is a trap, Magnus. He knows you'll come regardless of the danger because Elias is your son." "What choice do I have?" Magnus demanded, his massive form vibrating with barely contained fury. "We make our own choice. We set our own trap." Seraphina's mind worked rapidly, drawing on the ancient knowledge she had absorbed over the past weeks. Blood magic has weaknesses, and I know how to exploit them. For a moment, Magnus looked as though he might reject any plan that didn't involve immediate violence. Then, with visible effort, he reined in his transformation, his features settling back into human form, though his eyes still burned with alpha power. "Tell me," he said simply. As Seraphina outlined her strategy, Commander Gideon returned with grim news. Darius had fled the palace hours earlier, taking a contingent of guards loyal to him. The betrayal went deeper than anyone had suspected, with several high-ranking pack members apparently compromised. "He's been planning this for months, possibly years," Gideon reported. "Building loyalty, studying forbidden arts, forming alliances with other packs. This attack on the Border Patrol was just the beginning." "No," Seraphina corrected grimly. "It was preparation. The blood magic he performed on your warriors was gathering power for something bigger, something that requires the heart of a life weaver and the blood of royal lineage. The ritual of ascension," Morwenna said from the doorway, her aged face pale with horror. She clutched an ancient text in her gnarled hands. "I found this in Darius's quarters. It describes a forbidden ritual that transfers alpha power from one bloodline to another through sacrifice." "He wants to take my throne," Magnus growled, "by sacrificing my son and the life weaver." "Not just take your throne," Morwenna clarified, her voice shaking. "If this ritual succeeds, it would make him more powerful than any alpha in history. It would corrupt the natural order of succession and taint the very magic that binds our kind to the moon." Seraphina met Magnus's gaze, determination replacing fear. "Then we stop him, tonight." As midnight approached, Seraphina felt calm descend over her despite the danger ahead. The past 7 years had prepared her for this moment, though she hadn't known it. All the hardship, the rejection, the solitary study of healing arts, it had shaped her into someone capable of facing this threat, someone worthy of the Silverwind legacy. She stood beside Magnus at the edge of the sacred grove, her silver-white hair gleaming in the moonlight. She wore a simple white dress provided by Morwenna, marked with protective runes that were invisible except when they caught the moonlight at certain angles. Around her neck hung a pendant containing a drop of Magnus's blood, creating a secondary bond that would be crucial to their plan. Magnus himself wore traditional ceremonial armor, leather reinforced with metal at vital points, marked with the Ironheart pack symbols. At his hip hung an ancient sword passed down through generations of Alpha Kings, its blade reportedly forged with moon silver that could disrupt magical workings. "Remember," Seraphina said quietly as they prepared to enter the grove, "no matter what happens, what you see or feel, stick to the plan. The blood bond between us is our strength, but Darius will try to use it against us." Magnus nodded once, his face set in grim lines. "Find Elias, protect him, leave Darius to me." "And if the plan fails?" Magnus's amber eyes met her gray ones, something unspoken passing between them through the bond. "Then we die together, protecting what matters most." With those words, they stepped into the sacred grove to confront the darkness that threatened everything they had come to cherish. Moonlight filtered through ancient trees, casting long shadows across the sacred grove. The air itself seemed to pulse with mystical energy, the boundary between the mortal world and the spirit realm growing thin in this hallowed place where generations of wolf packs had communed with the moon goddess. Stone monoliths, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, stood in a perfect circle around a central altar, a flat slab of moonstone that gleamed with an inner light. Upon that altar lay Prince Elias, his small body unnaturally still, bound by ropes marked with forbidden sigils. Around him, dark symbols had been painted on the moonstone in what appeared to be blood, perversions of the sacred life weaver runes that Seraphina had been studying. Darius Bloodfang stood beside the altar, no longer bothering with the facade of aristocratic refinement. His elegant clothes had been replaced by ritual garments of black leather adorned with bones and teeth. His once handsome face was now gaunt, eyes sunken and glowing with an unnatural blue light. The forbidden blood magic had already begun changing him, corrupting his very essence. Flanking him were a dozen warriors wearing the emblems of the Shadowclaw pack, their expressions vacant and eyes glazed, thralls bound to Darius's will through dark magic rather than true allies. "Welcome, brother," Darius called out as Magnus and Seraphina entered the grove. His voice had changed too, layered with harmonics that seemed to echo from somewhere beyond the physical world. "How generous of you to bring the Life Weaver directly to me. It saves the trouble of hunting her down." Magnus's face remained impassive, though Seraphina could feel his rage pulsing through their bond. "Release my son, Darius. Whatever quarrel you have with me, Elias is innocent." "Innocent?" Darius laughed, the sound brittle and wrong. "No royal blood is innocent. Our family built its power on the bones of defeated enemies, brother. You merely hide your brutality behind laws and tradition." He stroked Elias's white blonde hair almost tenderly. "But the boy will serve a greater purpose than simply continuing your bloodline. His royal essence, combined with the Life Weaver's heart, will fuel my ascension." Seraphina took a careful step forward, her eyes fixed on Elias. The boy appeared to be in a magical slumber rather than harmed, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Through their blood bond, she could sense his life force, dimmed but intact. "The ritual of ascension won't work, Darius," she said calmly, despite the fear churning in her stomach. "You've misinterpreted the ancient texts. Blood magic corrupts the practitioner. You're destroying yourself." Darius's unnatural eyes narrowed as they focused on her. "The last Life Weaver," he mused, ignoring her warning. "How perfectly you fit the prophecy. When silver blood flows once more, the kingdom will stand strong or fall forever. The old fools interpreted this as your bloodline's return, bringing strength to the territories." His lips stretched in a terrible smile. "But I understand the true meaning. Your silver blood flowing out upon this altar will cause the old kingdom to fall and my new empire to rise." "You're mad," Magnus growled, taking an aggressive step forward. Immediately, the thralled Shadowclaw warriors moved to defensive positions, and Darius pressed a ceremonial dagger against Elias's throat. "Careful, brother. The ritual requires the child's blood, but it doesn't specify how much. I'd prefer to keep him alive until the proper moment, but I'm adaptable." Magnus froze, and Seraphina placed a restraining hand on his arm. Through their bond, she projected calm determination, reminding him of their plan. "What do you want, Darius?" Seraphina asked, though she knew the answer. "A simple exchange. You for the boy." Darius gestured with the dagger. "Come to the altar willingly, offer no resistance, and I'll release the prince to his father. Refuse, and the child dies now, though it would make the ritual less potent." Seraphina stepped forward, ignoring Magnus's warning growl. "I'll come to you, but release Elias first." Darius laughed. "You're in no position to negotiate, Life Weaver. The boy stays until you're secured." Seraphina continued walking slowly toward the altar, her bare feet silent on the moss-covered ground. "Then at least let me see that he's unharmed." As she drew closer, she could feel the wrongness emanating from the corrupted symbols carved into the moonstone altar. Ancient magic twisted to serve darkness rather than the sacred purpose for which it was intended. The air grew colder around her, as if the natural world itself recoiled from the perversion taking place. When she reached the altar, Darius motioned two of his thralls to seize her arms. Their grips were painfully tight, but Seraphina barely noticed, her attention focused entirely on Elias. Gently she touched the boy's forehead, sensing the magical slumber Darius had imposed. "He's merely sleeping," Darius confirmed, watching her with those disturbing eyes. "Quite peaceful, really. He'll feel nothing when his blood joins yours to complete the ritual." Behind them, Magnus paced at the edge of the circle like a caged predator, held back only by the knife at his son's throat and the plan he and Seraphina had devised. Through their bond, she felt his struggle to maintain control, to trust her despite every instinct screaming at him to attack. "You won't succeed," Seraphina told Darius quietly. "The Life Weaver's gift cannot be taken by force. It must be freely given, just as I gave my life force to save Elias in the forest." "A lovely sentiment," Darius mocked. "But the ancient texts disagree. Blood magic cares nothing for consent, only power." He gestured to the thralls, who forced Seraphina onto a second, smaller altar, positioned perpendicular to where Elias lay. "And tonight, under the full moon, I will claim the power that should have been mine by birthright." As the thralls bound her wrists and ankles with the same sigil-marked ropes that held Elias, Seraphina closed her eyes, centering herself. The pendant containing Magnus's blood rested against her heart, warm against her skin, despite the growing chill. She focused on the triple bond that now connected her to both Ironheart wolves, the original blood bond with Elias formed during her sacrificial healing, the blood moon ritual bond with Magnus, and now the temporary amplification bond created by the blood pendant. While Darius began chanting in the ancient tongue, positioning ceremonial bowls around the two altars, Seraphina reached through these bonds, calling silently to the slumbering prince. "Elias, can you hear me?" For several tense moments there was nothing. Then faintly, like a distant echo, "I'm scared." "I know, little one, but I need you to be brave. When I tell you, I need you to shift forms. Can you do that, even while tied?" The mental voice strengthened. "Yes, Father taught me emergency shifting." "Good, wait for my signal. Don't move until then." Seraphina opened her eyes to find Darius looming over her, ceremonial dagger in hand. The blade gleamed strangely in the moonlight, runes etched along its length glowing with sickly blue fire. The ancients believed the heart of a life-weaver contained the essence of their power. He informed her conversationally, as if discussing an academic curiosity rather than her imminent murder. "I'll extract yours while it still beats and consume it before moving on to the royal blood." He glanced at Magnus, who stood rigid with barely contained fury at the edge of the circle. "Don't worry, brother. You'll join them soon after. The ritual requires the death of the previous Alpha King to complete the transfer of power." The tip of the dagger pressed against Seraphina's chest, directly over her heart, slicing through the thin fabric of her white dress to draw a bead of blood. Darius's eyes fixed on the crimson drop with disturbing intensity. "Silver blood indeed," he murmured. "The legends were literal, it seems." The moment the daggers pierced her skin, Seraphina enacted their plan. Through the triple bond, she sent a surge of healing energy, not to Elias or Magnus, but to the corrupted thralls who stood guard around the circle. Blood magic worked by dominating the will of the victim, suppressing their true nature beneath the practitioner's control. But healing magic, the true gift of the life-weavers, restored natural balance. The surge of pure energy flowing from Seraphina targeted the magical bindings enslaving the Shadowclaw warriors, burning away the corruption like sunlight dispelling fog. One by one, the thralls shuddered, their glazed expressions clearing as awareness returned. Confusion turned to horror as they realized their situation, some staring at their hands as if seeing them for the first time in months. Darius felt the change immediately, whirling to see his puppet army breaking free of his control. "No!" he snarled, abandoning the ceremonial pace of the ritual and raising the dagger to plunge it into Seraphina's heart. "Now, Elias!" Seraphina shouted. The young prince's body contorted, shifting from human to wolf form with the uncanny speed that royal bloodlines possessed. His small wolf body easily slipped free of the human-sized restraints, and he leapt at Darius with a ferocity startling in one so young, jaws clamping onto the wrist, holding the ceremonial dagger. Darius howled in pain and rage, trying to shake off the determined cub. The distraction was all Magnus needed. The Alpha King surged forward, crossing the clearing in a heartbeat, his massive form shifting mid-stride from man to enormous black wolf. Chaos erupted in the sacred grove. The freed Shadowclaw warriors, disoriented but no longer enslaved, scattered into the forest or turned on the few guards still loyal to Darius. Magnus tore through anyone who tried to stand between him and his brother, his focus singular and deadly. Seraphina, still bound to the smaller altar, concentrated on breaking her own restraints. The sigil-marked ropes were designed to contain her life-weaver abilities, but they hadn't accounted for the amplification provided by the triple bond. Drawing on Magnus's strength through their connection, she focused healing energy inward, targeting the corrupted magic in the bindings until they smoldered and fell away. By the time she freed herself, Magnus had cornered Darius against one of the ancient monoliths. Elias had been thrown aside during the struggle, but appeared uninjured, his small wolf form darting between fallen bodies to reach Seraphina's side. Darius, bleeding from multiple wounds, no longer resembled the aristocratic royal he had once been. The blood magic had accelerated its corruption, transforming him into something monstrous. His skin had taken on a grayish cast, blue veins visible beneath the surface. His eyes burned with that unnatural light, and when he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You've ruined the ritual, but you've only delayed the inevitable," he hissed, blood dripping from his mouth. The old ways are returning, brother. The territories will burn in magical fire before a new order rises from the ashes." Magnus advanced in wolf form, hackles raised, a growl rumbling from deep in his massive chest. There was no humanity in his amber eyes now, only the predator's promise of death. Darius laughed, the sound distorted and wrong. "Go ahead, brother, kill me. My blood spilled on this sacred ground will seed a darkness you cannot imagine." Seraphina, who had gathered Elias protectively against her side, suddenly understood. "Magnus, stop! That's what he wants!" Too late. The Alpha King lunged, powerful jaws closing around Darius's throat in a killing bite. But as his teeth pierced flesh, an explosion of blue-black energy erupted from the wound. The magical backlash threw Magnus backward, his massive wolf body crashing into the central altar with a sickening crack. Darius remained standing, the fatal wound in his throat pulsing with corrupt magic rather than bleeding naturally. "Blood calls to blood," he intoned, his voice now entirely inhuman. "The sacrifice is accepted, though not as I intended." The dark energy swirling around him intensified, spreading outward to engulf the sacred stones. The moonstone altar began to crack, black veins spreading through its luminescent surface. Seraphina pushed Elias behind her, horrified understanding dawning. Darius hadn't been attempting a simple power grab. The ritual of ascension was merely preparation for something far worse, a breaking of the ancient seals that kept primal chaos from entering the mortal world. The sacred grove was one such seal, and Darius had just corrupted it with royal blood and forbidden magic. Magnus shifted back to human form, blood streaming from a head wound as he struggled to rise. "What have you done?" he demanded. Darius's body was deteriorating before their eyes, flesh sloughing away as the magic consumed him from within. But his voice remained, disembodied and triumphant. "What our ancestors feared most. I have opened the way for the old ones to return. Those who ruled before the moon goddess banished them beyond the veil. They promised me power beyond imagining if I broke the first seal." The ground beneath them trembled. The night sky above the grove darkened unnaturally, stars blinking out as something began to press against the fabric of reality. "They lied to you!" Seraphina called out, desperation giving her courage. "The old ones enslave. They don't reward. You've sacrificed yourself for nothing." The disembodied laughter that answered held no trace of the wolf who had once been Magnus's brother. "Perhaps, but I take comfort knowing I've doomed you all to the same fate." With those final words, what remained of Darius Bloodfang collapsed into ash, leaving only the corrupted ceremonial dagger gleaming amid the remains. But the dark energy continued to build, the barrier between worlds growing thinner by the second. Magnus staggered to Seraphina's side, one arm clutching his ribs where they had shattered against the altar. "We need to get out of here," he growled, pulling Elias close with his good arm. "The grove is lost." "No." Seraphina stood her ground, watching the spreading corruption with a healer's eye. "If we flee, the barrier fails completely. Whatever comes through will devastate the territories." She turned to face Magnus, determination hardening her features. "There's only one way to counter this." Understanding dawned in Magnus's amber eyes, followed by refusal. "No, I won't let you sacrifice yourself again." "I'm not talking about sacrifice," Seraphina clarified. "I'm talking about restoration, the Life Weaver's true purpose." She gestured to the corrupted altar. This sacred place was created to channel the moon goddess's blessing. Darius perverted it, but the original magic remains beneath the corruption. I can restore it, but I'll need help. "What kind of help?" Magnus asked warily. "Your strength, through our bond, and pure royal blood freely given, not taken." She knelt beside Elias, who had shifted back to human form, his small face solemn beyond his years. "I would never ask this of you if there were any other way, Elias, but we need a drop of your blood, given willingly, to counteract what your uncle tried to take by force." The young prince looked to his father, who nodded gravely after a moment's hesitation. "Will it hurt?" Elias asked. "Just a small prick," Seraphina promised, "and I'll heal it immediately after." With Elias's brave nod of consent, Seraphina carefully took his small hand. Using a clean sliver of moonstone that had broken from the altar, she made the tiniest cut on his finger, catching a single drop of blood in her palm. As promised, she immediately sealed the wound with a touch of healing energy. Standing, she approached the corrupted central altar, Magnus and Elias close behind her. The dark energy swirling around them grew more violent, the barrier between worlds now tissue-thin. Through the deteriorating veil, shadowy appendages began to probe, seeking entry to the mortal realm. "Whatever you're going to do it quickly," Magnus urged, positioning himself protectively before his son. Seraphina placed her palm with Elias's blood against the cracked moonstone altar. With her other hand, she gripped the pendant containing Magnus's blood that hung around her neck. Through their triple bond, she drew on the combined strength of both Ironheart wolves, channeling it through her Lifeweaver abilities. Unlike the desperate improvisation in the forest when she saved Elias, or the instinctive healing she had performed in the palace, this was deliberate application of her birthright. Drawing on knowledge gleaned from the ancient texts, Seraphina spoke words of power in the old tongue. Not the perverted version Darius had used, but the original language of healing and harmony. "Blood freely given restores what was taken," she intoned, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Life freely shared heals what was broken. By the ancient pact between wolf and moon, I call upon the goddess to renew her blessing upon this sacred ground." The pendant at her throat grew hot, then burst into silver flame that didn't burn. The single drop of Elias's blood on her palm expanded into a sphere of crimson light. As Seraphina continued the invocation, the dual energies merged, creating a swirling vortex of silver-red power that flowed from her hands into the corrupted altar. Where blood magic corrupted by dominating and perverting natural energy, Lifeweaver magic healed by restoring harmony and balance. The silver-red energy spread through the black veins in the moonstone, not fighting the corruption, but transforming it, returning it to its natural state. The effort was tremendous. Sweat beaded on Seraphina's brow, her body trembling with the strain of channeling so much power. Through the bond, Magnus and Elias supported her, their life forces temporarily merging with hers to create a power greater than any could wield alone. As the cleansing energy reached the outer edges of the sacred circle, the shadowy appendages reaching through the weakened barrier recoiled. The darkness in the sky began to recede, stars reappearing one by one as the natural order reasserted itself. With a final surge of combined power, Seraphina completed the restoration. The moonstone altar blazed with silver light, no trace of corruption remaining. The sacred stones around the grove hummed with renewed energy, the barrier between worlds solidifying once more. The backlash of released magic knocked all three of them off their feet. Magnus recovered first, crawling to where Seraphina lay motionless on the ground, her silver-white hair spread around her like a halo, her face deathly pale. "Seraphina!" He gathered her into his arms, panic rising when she didn't respond. Through their bond, he could still feel her presence, but it was weak, flickering like a candle in strong wind. Elias pressed against his father's side, small hands touching Seraphina's face. "She's cold, father." Magnus had seen this before, when Seraphina had nearly sacrificed herself to save Elias in the forest. She had drained her life force dangerously low once again, this time to save them all. "Not again," he growled, pulling her closer. "You don't get to leave us now." Acting on instinct rather than calculated decision, Magnus bit into his own wrist, opening a vein. He pressed the bleeding wound to Seraphina's lips, forcing small amounts of blood into her mouth. "What are you doing?" Elias asked, eyes wide. "Returning what she gave," Magnus answered grimly. "Life for life, blood for blood." Unlike the formal blood moon ritual performed by Morwenna, this was raw, primal magic. The desperate act of an alpha wolf trying to save a pack member. The bond between them flared to blinding intensity as Magnus's blood entered Seraphina's system, carrying with it his strength, his vitality, his stubborn refusal to let her go. For several agonizing moments, nothing happened. Then Seraphina gasped, her body arching as life surged back into her. Her eyes flew open, gray irises illuminated from within by silver light. "Magnus," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "You shouldn't have—" "Don't," he interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't tell me what I shouldn't do when it comes to saving your life. You've sacrificed enough for this family." Seraphina's lips curved in a weak smile. "Ironheart indeed, stubborn wolf." Elias wiggled between them, his small arms wrapping around Seraphina's neck. "Does this mean you'll stay with us forever now?" he asked hopefully. The question hung in the air between them. Despite all they had been through together, despite the magical bonds that connected them, Seraphina had never formally agreed to remain with the Ironheart Pack. Magnus had promised her freedom to choose her own path once she recovered, and he was a wolf who kept his word. Before she could answer, the sound of approaching wolves drew their attention. Commander Gideon arrived with a contingent of royal guards, followed closely by Morwenna, who rushed to their side with healer's instincts. "The sacred grove," the old healer gasped, looking around at the restored stones and altar, now glowing with renewed power. "It's more vibrant than I've seen in my lifetime. How did you—" She stopped, noticing the blood on Magnus's wrist and Seraphina's lips. Understanding dawned in her ancient eyes. "Another blood bond? My king, such magic is not to be used lightly." "There was nothing light about it," Magnus replied, not relinquishing his hold on Seraphina. Darius nearly succeeded in breaking the barrier to the old ones. Seraphina restored the seal, nearly killing herself in the process. Gideon, who had been securing the area with his warriors, returned to report. "The Shadowclaw warriors who survived have surrendered, my king. Most claim they were under some form of mind control for months. Those few who followed Darius willingly are being detained separately." Magnus nodded, his focus still primarily on Seraphina. "We'll sort it out later. For now, get everyone safely back to the palace, and send runners to the other territories. The Alpha Kings and Queens must be warned about what happened here tonight. If this grove was targeted, others may be as well." As the guards organized the survivors and prepared stretchers for the wounded, Morwenna examined Seraphina more carefully. "The ritual you performed," she said quietly, so only Seraphina and Magnus could hear. "It wasn't just restoration, was it?" Seraphina shook her head weakly. "The prophecy. When silver blood flows once more, the kingdom will stand strong or fall forever. My blood did flow tonight, but given freely rather than taken. I think we fulfilled the prophecy as it was meant to be fulfilled." "So the territories will stand strong," Magnus concluded. "If we work to make it so," Seraphina cautioned. "Prophecies are guidelines, not guarantees. Darius may have been stopped, but he spoke of others who shared his beliefs. The old conflicts between packs remain. There is much healing needed beyond just this grove." Magnus helped her to her feet, supporting her weight when her legs threatened to buckle. "Then it's fortunate we have a life weaver to guide that healing." Seraphina leaned against his strength, too exhausted to maintain pride or distance. Through their now multiple blood bonds, she felt his genuine concern, his relief at her survival, and something deeper that neither of them had acknowledged openly, a growing attachment that transcended magical connections. "Does this mean you'll stay?" Elias repeated his question, his small face serious as he looked up at the adults. "Be my mother for real?" Magnus tensed beside her, clearly wanting to silence his son's direct questioning, but honoring Seraphina's right to answer honestly. Seraphina knelt carefully to Elias's level, wincing at the residual pain from channeling so much magic. "Being a mother is about more than blood bonds or magical connections," she said gently. "It's a choice made every day, to love and protect and guide. Are you sure that's what you want from me?" "I've been sure since the forest," Elias said with childlike certainty. "You were in my dreams even before I met you. The moon goddess told me you would come." Seraphina glanced up at Magnus in surprise. He shrugged slightly, as bewildered by this revelation as she was. Children sometimes had deeper connections to the spiritual aspects of wolf nature than adults, but direct messages from the goddess were rare indeed. "If you'll have me," she finally answered Elias, "then yes, I will stay and be your mother." Her gaze lifted to Magnus, uncertainty in her storm-gray eyes. "If your father agrees." The Alpha King's expression softened in a way few ever witnessed, the hard lines of leadership momentarily giving way to the man beneath the crown. "My son chose well," he said simply, "and I find myself in complete agreement with his judgment." Before the moment could deepen further, Morwenna interrupted with a healer's practicality. "This reunion can continue at the palace. Both of you need proper medical attention and rest. The magical workings tonight have drained you dangerously." With Gideon's help, they organized a careful return to the palace. Seraphina carried on a stretcher despite her weak protests that she could walk. Elias refused to leave her side, curling up next to her on the stretcher once Morwenna grudgingly approved, his small hand clasped tightly in hers. Magnus walked alongside, occasionally touching Seraphina's shoulder or hair as if reassuring himself of her continued presence. Through their bond, she felt his exhaustion matching her own, but also his fierce determination to protect what was his. And somehow, through blood and battle and shared purpose, she had become his to protect. The return to the palace passed in a blur for Serafina, her consciousness fading in and out as magical exhaustion claimed its due. She was vaguely aware of being transferred to a bed, of Morwenna's gnarled hands applying healing salves, of Elias refusing to be separated from her despite the late hour, and always Magnus's presence nearby, a steady anchor in her awareness. When she finally woke properly, sunlight was streaming through tall windows. She lay in the royal bed where she had first awakened after the forest incident, but this time she wasn't alone. Elias was curled against her side, still deeply asleep, and in a chair beside the bed, Magnus sat with his head tilted back, also sleeping, one large hand resting on the mattress near hers. The domestic tableau struck Serafina with unexpected force. 7 years of wandering alone, of being the outsider, the strange omega with unnatural coloring. 7 years of guarding her heart against attachment, because attachment meant inevitable pain when she was forced to move on. Now somehow, she had found not just acceptance, but belonging. A place where her differences were valued rather than feared. A child who called her mother without hesitation. An alpha king who respected her strength rather than demanding her submission. As if sensing her thoughts through their bond, Magnus stirred, amber eyes opening to find her watching him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, no words necessary between two souls connected on multiple levels. "How do you feel?" he finally asked, his deep voice rough with sleep. "Like I channeled enough magic to repair an ancient mystical barrier," she replied with a hint of dry humor. "But I'll live." "You'd better." The simple statement carried layers of meaning. "We have too much left to do for you to consider any more heroic sacrifices." Serafina glanced down at Elias, still peacefully sleeping against her. "I told him I'd stay, be his mother." "I remember." Magnus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What I don't know is if that's truly what you want, or if you felt pressured by circumstances." "Would you release me from the promise if I asked?" Serafina challenged quietly. Magnus didn't hesitate. "Yes, though it would break his heart, and mine." The simple admission hung between them, more significant for its unadorned honesty. Magnus Ironheart was not a wolf who easily revealed vulnerability or personal desires. For him to acknowledge the pain her departure would cause was monumental. Serafina reached out, her pale fingers finding his larger, scarred hand. "I have wandered long enough," she said softly. "If you'll have me, I would stay. Not just for Elias, but for myself. And for you, if that's what you want." Magnus's hand turned, engulfing hers in a gentle grip. "What I want," he said carefully, "is for you to find your place here, not as a guest or an obligation, but as a true member of this pack, this family." His thumb traced patterns on her palm, sending unexpected warmth up her arm. "The form that takes is yours to define." The unspoken question lingered between them. Their magical bonds were complex and multifaceted, life-weaver to patient, blood ritual participants, now further complicated by the raw exchange in the grove. But none of these were the traditional mate bond that sometimes formed between wolves, the romantic and lifelong connection celebrated in pack ceremonies. Before Serafina could respond, Elias stirred beside her, amber eyes blinking open. "Are you feeling better, Mother?" he asked sleepily, the title falling from his lips with natural ease. "Much better, little wolf," she assured him, smoothing his white blonde hair. "Thanks to you and your father." The boy beamed at the acknowledgement, then looked between the two adults with a child's perceptiveness. "Are you going to be Father's mate now, like a real family?" Magnus made a strangled sound that might have been embarrassment or amusement. "Elias, that's not a question you should ask directly." "Why not?" the boy demanded with innocent logic. "You both want it. I can feel it." He tapped his chest, where the blood bond connected him to both adults. "In here." Serafina felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she couldn't deny the truth of the child's observation. Through their various bonds, emotions couldn't be completely hidden, especially the stronger ones. And what she felt for Magnus had been growing steadily from respect to something far more complex. "Adult relationships take time to develop properly," she told Elias gently. "But your father and I care for each other very much, and we both love you. Isn't that a good start?" This seemed to satisfy the boy, who nodded solemnly before asking if he could go find breakfast. Magnus, clearly grateful for the change of subject, called for a servant to escort his son to the dining hall, promising they would join him shortly. When they were alone again, an awkward silence fell. 7 years of solitude had left Serafina ill-equipped for navigating intimate conversations, and Magnus's position as Alpha King had similarly isolated him emotionally from others. "Elias has always been too perceptive for his age," Magnus finally said, breaking the tension. "He's right, though, isn't he?" Serafina looked directly at him, summoning her courage. "There's something between us beyond the magical bonds, something that's been growing since you found me in that forest." Magnus met her gaze steadily. "Yes, but I would never presume—" "I know," she smiled slightly. "The great Alpha King, so careful not to impose his will on an Omega, so determined to give me choices when the rest of the world never did." "Is that so strange?" he asked, genuinely curious. "For an Alpha, yes." Serafina's expression softened. "But you've never been like other Alphas, have you? You see strength in different forms. You value wisdom alongside power. You raise your son to question rather than simply obey." "And you've never been like other Omegas," Magnus countered. "You faced 3 rogues alone to save a child you didn't know. You channeled ancient magic that masters spend lifetimes studying. You stood against my brother when seasoned warriors cowered." "Perhaps that's why the bonds between us formed so easily," Serafina suggested. "We each recognize something in the other that defies traditional expectations." Magnus rose from his chair to sit on the edge of the bed, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his powerful frame. "Whatever the reason, I am grateful for it." His hand lifted, hesitating briefly before gently touching her silver-white hair. "When I found you in that forest, bleeding out on the ground beside my son, I thought you were the most beautiful, terrible sight I had ever witnessed. Terrible because of your suffering, beautiful because of your sacrifice." The words, spoken with simple sincerity rather than practiced charm, touched something deep within Serafina. No one had ever called her beautiful before. Strange, unsettling, ghost-like. These were the words typically associated with her unusual coloring. "I'm still learning what it means to be a life weaver," she said quietly. "Still discovering the heritage I never knew I had. I can't promise I'll always fit neatly into royal pack life." "I would never ask you to be less than you are," Magnus assured her. "The territories need a life weaver as much as my son needs a mother, and I need—" He paused, uncharacteristically hesitant. "What do you need, Magnus?" Serafina prompted gently. His amber eyes held hers, all pretense of kingly distance gone. "A partner, an equal. Someone who sees me as a wolf, not just a crown. Someone who will challenge me when I'm wrong and support me when I'm right." His hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb brushing her lower lip. "I need you, Serafina Silverwind, in whatever capacity you're willing to give yourself." The raw honesty of his declaration deserved nothing less in return. Serafina leaned into his touch, her gray eyes steady on his. "Then take me as I am, Magnus Ironheart, life weaver, healer, mother to your son, and yes, mate to the Alpha King if that's truly what you want." Something fierce and joyful flashed in Magnus's eyes. "I want," he growled, the words rumbling from deep in his chest. When his lips finally met hers, it wasn't with an alpha's demanding possession, but with reverent care that slowly kindled to passionate fire. Through their multiple bonds, the connection flared with new dimensions, emotional and physical desire weaving through the magical ties that already bound them. Serafina had known solitude for so long that this sudden completeness was overwhelming. Tears slipped unbidden down her cheeks as Magnus deepened the kiss, his arms enfolding her with protective strength. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Magnus rested his forehead against hers. "I did not expect to find you," he murmured. "After Elena died giving birth to Elias, I resigned myself to ruling alone, to raising my son without a mother's influence." "The moon goddess works in mysterious ways," Serafina replied, her hands curled against his chest, feeling the strong heartbeat that now echoed her own through their bonds. "Indeed she does." Magnus pressed another kiss to her brow before reluctantly pulling back. "We should join Elias before he decides to organize a search party. That boy has never been patient." "Like his father," Serafina teased gently, earning a rare full smile from the typically stoic king. With Magnus's help, she rose from the bed, still somewhat unsteady from magical exhaustion. He supported her with an arm around her waist, the casual intimacy feeling both novel and perfectly natural. As they made their slow way toward the dining hall, palace staff bowed respectfully as they passed. But Serafina noticed a difference in their regard. Where once there had been curiosity about the strange Omega the king had saved, now there was deference. Word of what had transpired in the sacred grove had clearly spread throughout the palace. She was no longer just a guest or an oddity, but a hero in her own right, the life weaver who had stood against dark magic and prevailed. Elias spotted them the moment they entered the dining hall, abandoning his breakfast to rush into Serafina's arms. She knelt to receive his enthusiastic embrace, no longer startled by the ease with which he claimed her as his own. "Mother! Father! Commander Gideon says I fought bravely last night, like a true Ironheart." The boy's face shone with pride, and he says I can start proper warrior training once I'm fully recovered. Magnus raised an eyebrow at his commander, who shrugged unapologetically from his seat at the long table. "The prince has earned it, my king. Not many cubs his age would have the courage to attack a blood mage." "We'll discuss training later," Magnus said, though his tone held more pride than disapproval. "For now, we all need to rest and recover." As servants brought food and Elias chattered excitedly about his plans for future training, Serafina looked around at the gathered pack members, Gideon with his gruff loyalty, Morwenna with her ancient wisdom, the guards and servants who maintained the complex hierarchy of pack life, strangers just weeks ago, now increasingly familiar. This was to be her home now, these wolves, her pack. After 7 years of wandering, she had found not just acceptance, but true belonging, a place where her differences were valued rather than feared, a family formed through choice and sacrifice rather than mere circumstance of birth. Months passed, the seasons turning as Serafina settled into her new life with the Ironheart pack. Spring gave way to summer, and summer to the first hints of autumn. The attack on the sacred grove had far-reaching consequences throughout the territories. Magnus spent much of his time strengthening alliances with other packs, rebuilding trust damaged by Darius's betrayal. The Shadowclaw pack, most of whom had been unwilling thralls, sought reconciliation and formal peace treaties. Serafina, now officially recognized as Luna of the Ironheart pack, divided her time between mothering Elias, training younger healers in the old ways, and researching her life weaver heritage. The ancient texts in the royal library proved invaluable, helping her understand and control abilities that had previously manifested only in moments of crisis. The formal mating ceremony took place under the full moon of midsummer, with representatives from all major territories in attendance. Where once wolves had looked at Serafina's silver-white hair and storm-gray eyes with suspicion, they now saw the physical manifestation of a nearly lost bloodline returned. The Life Weaver and the Alpha King, bound by both ancient magic and freely chosen love, represented a new hope for the fractured territories. On the night of the autumn equinox, as the pack prepared for the seasonal celebration, Serafina stood on the balcony outside the royal chambers, watching the moon rise over the forest. Magnus joined her, his powerful arms encircling her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "You're deep in thought, Luna," he observed, using her official title with the hint of playfulness that only she ever witnessed. "Remembering," she corrected, leaning back against his solid warmth. "It was nearly a year ago that I heard a wolf cub cry in the silent forest. So much has changed since then." "For the better, I hope?" There was a hint of vulnerability in the question that few would ever detect in the mighty Alpha King's voice. Serafina turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the strong lines of his face. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," she assured him, "though I still have much to learn about being a proper Luna." Magnus chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her palms. "There is nothing proper about you, Serafina Ironheart, and that is precisely what makes you the perfect Luna for this pack, for this king." The use of his surname joined with hers still sent a thrill through Serafina. After a lifetime of isolation due to her differences, she now belonged to a lineage of power and respect. More importantly, she belonged to herself, her heritage no longer a mystery, but a source of strength. "Mother, "Father!" Elias's voice called from within the chamber. "Morwenna says the ceremony can't start without you, and I want to see the fire lighting." Seraphina smiled at her son's impatience. At 7 years old, Elias was growing rapidly, his natural exuberance tempered by the responsibility of his position as heir. The blood bond between them had stabilized into a permanent connection, different from but complementary to the maternal love that had grown naturally over time. "We're coming, little wolf," she called back. Before they left the balcony, she pressed a quick kiss to Magnus's lips. "Life certainly took an unexpected turn in that forest," she murmured against his mouth. "The best journeys often do," he replied, returning the kiss with one of his own before leading her inside to where their son waited. As the royal family joined their pack for the equinox celebration, wolves throughout the territories noted the unique silver light of the full moon, brighter than any in living memory. Some said it was the moon goddess's blessing on the union of Alpha King and Life Weaver. Others claimed it heralded a new era of healing for the long-fractured wolf kingdoms. Seraphina, standing between her mate and son as sacred fires were lit around the restored grove, felt the truth of both interpretations. The ancient prophecy had been fulfilled not through blood shed in violence, but through blood freely given in sacrifice and love. When silver blood flows once more, the kingdom will stand strong or fall forever. The Life Weaver had returned to the royal pack, and with her, the promise of a future where differences were strength, not weakness, where ancient enemies could find common purpose, where a lone Omega with strange coloring could become mother, mate, and Luna, where a family could be forged not just by blood, but by choice, sacrifice, and abiding love. The legacy of the Life Weaver had only just begun.